A beard, an old hippie type, who was drinking beer and watching TV, and he's going to go, "Fucking A, those are my boys, goddamned U.S. There are going to be moms out there that are crying and saying, "That's my boy." They are going to be watching you. You need to do this well. This will be with you for the rest of your lives. You will remember this night forever, so you want to do the best job you possibly can, because if you don't, you will regret it until you die. As he listened, VFA 81 Sunliner Squadron Pilot Lieutenant Barry W. Skull Hull felt his mouth go bone dry. He wasn't alone. The very first thing we did was get a time hack so we'd all be on exact time, Hull remembered later. We're synchronized. In 30 seconds, it's going to be 24 after the hour, then 10, 9, 8, and then he called hack. The atmosphere in the room remained somber until the mass briefing ended. Then the squadrons went to their own ready rooms for their individual mission briefs. Hull, Scott Speicher, Tony Bano Albano, Michael T. Spock Anderson, Philip Chauncey Gardner, plus scores of other Navy pilots would soon climb into their FA-18 Hornets and roar off the carrier Saratoga in the Red Sea across Saudi Arabia toward Baghdad, initiating Operation Desert Storm. In the planning room, they reviewed the timing of the attack, their flight paths, and targets. Originally, Speicher wasn't supposed to go. His commander had tapped him as the airborne spare. He was to fly in and take over if any of the other jets malfunctioned. As such, the spare had to know everybody's mission. But he had gone to his commanding officer, Spock Anderson, the day before, and pleaded his case. He didn't want to be the spare, to be the one to have to turn around and come back to the ship without firing a shot. Anderson relented and let him join the mission. Instead, Spock assigned the spare position to Hull, but Hull balked too. I go, "Wait a minute. I don't want to be the spare either. It's not like I was some sort of big hero, and the truth is, it's not like Spike was being a hero," said Hull. "I wanted to be in there with my buddies." To fix his predicament with the skipper, Hull went looking for Spike. "The skipper didn't like me very much," Hull confessed, so he figured Spike could help smooth things over. "I said, 'Look what you did for yourself. You got to do it for me, too.' Spike goes, 'Yeah, sure.'" To assure Spike's success with Anderson, Hull told him that he'd get Conrad Banker Caldwell, "and I guarantee you Banker will know every single mission." And he did. Hull was back on the mission. Later, he thanked Spike. The mood of the Navy pilots is shown in a letter Barry Hull wrote home to his family a few days before. Saddam, he wrote, didn't appear to have his bags packed for a trip back to Iraq. "I suppose it could be arranged to send him back, maybe inside his own personal bag." There were no doubts about their readiness to go into combat. Hull was confident that the big picture was well in place and that they'd be able to concentrate on the details he and his squadron mates would soon face. "Occasionally, we have the luxury to sit back and think, 'The plans are ready. Now what else do I need to do?'" He ran the list of items all the Sunliners had to do before the deadline for Saddam's withdrawal drew closer. "We've sanitized our flight suits. That means all name tags and patches are removed. We wear our dog tags. Personal weapons are carried. My survival gear is so full of water that, you guessed it, my Oreos got smushed and I had to eat them and restock. Oh well. Wallets contain only military ID, family pictures, cash, and credit cards. The SAR, search and rescue, guys tell us if we go down, we might be able to rent a car and drive out. Weird, huh?" Hull also carried sunscreen, chapstick, and, of course, his Varnays. "Would you rather be seen in the desert in Ray-Bans or Varnays?" he asked his sister. "One of our maintenance troops gave me a raghead hat, the turban thing, in case I need to go incognito." Captain Dean M. Milo Hendrickson, Speicher's carrier air wing commander, was one of only a few pilots aboard the Saratoga who'd actually seen sustained combat. He warned the pilots of the first strike. "You're going to come back. Then you're going to look around, and one of you won't be here." The Sunliner Squadron's ready room was 6 decks down in the gigantic ship, and an escalator was used to carry the pilots and their 60 pounds of flight gear up to the flight deck. In the same letter, Hull describes the feeling of seeing the hatch leading outside. "A few deep breaths are taken at this point," Hull wrote home, "because I'm about to enter another world. It's dark and dangerous, and if you're not careful, it will kill you." The hatch to the flight deck was always pitch dark and seemed to suck the light out of Hull's flashlight. The hatch led to a catwalk, a small flight of steps below the flight deck. The pilots stepped among fueling hoses and extra catapult wires and chocks and chains and yellow gear. The sodium vapor lights cast an eerie glow on the men and aircraft. Looking into the lights, only the outline of men could be seen. Looking away from the lights, there were only the reflections off goggles and more darkness. On that flight run, a couple of days shy of combat, there were several hundred men topside. Hull had to find a man with a sunliner patch so he could tell him where to find his jet. "He knows what I want," continued Hull in his letter, "and just points without my asking." The 20 to 30 knot wind bent the men and the pilots over as they worked to get planes on and off the deck. "Your flashlight gives you a small tunnel vision to see clearly," Hull wrote, "and all the rest is noise and shadows. No faces, just helmets and goggles." Hull had once gone through an entire night launch and not known who his plane captain was. It was too dark to see and too loud to talk. Before Hull could reach his jet, a Hornet slammed into the deck 50 feet to his left and startled him. Maybe the Hornet's pilot had bolted, for he gave everyone a light show as his hook dragged down the landing area at 150 knots, spewing sparks and lighting up the night. All over the deck, ordnance men were loading and unloading and pushing carts stacked with bombs and smart missiles. The steam from the catapults blew by, sometimes completely enveloping the men standing in it. As the steam cleared, Hull shone his light onto the Hornet he was looking for, and there stood his plane captain, who would oversee the preparations for taking to the skies. A half hour before launch, the air boss came up on the loudspeaker. "Gentlemen, it's time to get into the proper flight deck uniform, sleeves rolled down, helmets on and buckled, goggles pulled down, life vests on and securely fastened. Let's check around the go-birds for FOD, foreign object debris. Whenever you're ready, gentlemen, let's crank 'em up. Crank the go-birds." No matter how many times a Navy pilot hears those words, they still give him goosebumps. Mounting his Hornet and settling in, Hull looked back on the ladder to see his plane captain close behind. He helped him strap in. With a word or two, Hull's plane captain wished him a safe flight and scampered down to do one last pre-flight check of the Hornet. From his perch in the cockpit, all Hull could see was the outline of the 19-year-old plane captain and the glow of his blue wands. As the Hornet's engines fired up, the canopy came down with a thud, then slid smoothly forward and locked into place. 15 minutes passed before Hull was ready to give a thumbs up. The chocks and chains were removed from his Hornet, nose wheel steering was engaged, and he armed his ejection seat. Taxi directors in yellow shirts came out to guide his Hornet to the catapult, as he tried to do the takeoff checks and roger the weight board. This refers to calculating the gross weight of the plane, including ordnance, fuel, gear, the pilot's weight, etc., so that the correct thrust can be applied to the catapult that launches the plane off of the carrier. Hull spread the wings of the Hornet and made sure they locked. One last big turn, and the jet was in place on the catapult. There is a rhythm and cadence to the men on the deck. 10 men scurried underneath the airplane to do final checks and hook up the launch bar. The taxi signals became precise, small and accurate movements. The ordnance men armed the Hornet's weapons and then passed the plane back. All stations checked go. Hull's heart was pounding. The yellow shirt checked with the catapult officer, and Hull got the sign to go for it and run up the engines. As he released the brakes, the holdback keeping him stationary on the catapult, Hull added full power. His head tilted back and the lights came on, the nighttime salute. The catapult officer touched the deck, signaling launch, and 5 seconds later, the Hornet lurched forward. Within 2 seconds, Hull was doing over 180 miles per hour, pinned to the seat. Hurtled into the air, Hull said, "You better believe most of us tap afterburner." A few nights later, he and his squadron mates would roar off the Saratoga for the first airstrike of the Persian Gulf War. In the planning room, Speicher and Albano learned that they'd take off well after midnight and return around dawn. Hearing that news, they decided they'd better get some sleep and walked back to the stateroom they shared. Speicher crawled into the top bunk, Albano into the bottom. They lay still for 45 minutes, hearts pounding, minds racing. "I can't sleep," Albano finally said softly. "I can't either." Around 1 a.m. local time, they put on their flight suits, boots, and gear, and walked through the mess deck and up to the flight deck. Speicher, Albano, and others from the Sunliner's squadron slapped hands. "See you back on deck in a couple of hours," Albano told his buddy. Scott Speicher had come to the Sunliners as a very junior department head. He didn't become a lieutenant commander until the squadron was underway on the Operation Desert Shield deployment. Scott Speicher had entered Aviation Officers Candidate School, AOCS, in Pensacola, Florida, in July 1980. After completing training at the top of his class, he was commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy on October 24th of that year. After he finished his flight training, he reported to the Hellraisers of VA-174 for his initial A-7E Corsair II replacement pilot training, then was assigned to the Gunslingers of VA-105, where he made deployments aboard the USS Carl Vinson, USS Forrestal, and from a base in Iwakuni, Japan. For the next 3 years, Scott transitioned from the A-7E to the FA-18 Hornet and qualified as a flight instructor in Strike Fighter Squadron 106, VFA 106. His years as a flight instructor were followed by a rotation back to a fleet squadron. Scott was a patient and thorough flight instructor. No one who recalled him as a teacher would say otherwise. Speicher and Albano had met long before. "We developed a close working and then a close personal friendship," Albano would say later. "We had similar personalities." They were also in a tightly knit squadron environment where pilots end up living together for 6 to 9 months out of the year in close quarters. "We work together and rely on each other to save one another's life and provide both mutual support on liberty as well as in the air and in combat." "There were times," recalled Albano, "that you tell your squadron mates things you never tell your wife." Albano had just rolled off the Carrier Air Wing 17 staff, where he'd been senior landing signal officer, to join the squadron. By chance, he ended up filling a slot with the Sunliners that had been occupied by Scott's roommate, who'd left for his next assignment. We became roommates and fellow department heads. Bano had also just spent some time with Scott and some of the other Sunliners out at Fallon, Nevada, where the squadron had gone on workups, training exercises, before their scheduled 6-month deployment. "Everyone goes to Lake Tahoe," he said, recalling a funny incident. "It's nice in the wintertime because you can go skiing. Everyone goes and gets a chalet. I remember Scott being passed out. I don't know if he was passed out or just got tired of being in the bar we had gone to, but he went out to the van and it was freezing out there. Scott had bundled up and climbed under all the coats piled in the back seat. He's out there," continued Bano, "and everyone's getting in the car." Speicher was under all the coats, but no one knew it yet. Where the hell is Spike, they thought. Then someone jumped in the back seat on top of the coats, and Spike started rising up like a hamster out of a pile of sawdust. "He just laid in the back of the van and went to sleep," recalls Bano. "I said, 'Spike, I gotta get you back. You're going to freeze out here. I'm going back to the bar, but I'm going to put you to bed, buddy.' Spike murmured, 'Thanks, Dad.'" Later, during the Christmas holiday, the Saratoga pulled into Haifa Harbor and put off Liberty boats for the crew and air wing personnel to go into Israel to see the sights. One day, the pilots were relaxing at a hotel in Haifa where they'd set up a squadron admin, which means the pilots get hotel rooms and hang out and have a good time. They were several floors up on a balcony having a cookout, and Spike looked across the street at some construction. $20 I can hit that bulldozer with this kielbasa, Spike said, smiling broadly. "You're on," the other pilots told him. So Spike grabbed a whole kielbasa, ducked into the room to line up his shot, then quick-stepped to the railing and tossed it. It hurtled up, out across the street, and then smacked right on top of the bulldozer. The operator looked over and started yelling, and the pilots cackled. "Direct hit! Direct hit!" On Christmas Eve, Scott went ashore with his executive officer, Bill Maggot McKee, Albano, and Craig Burt Bertolet. "We toured around Jerusalem," Albano remembered warmly, "and then we went around Bethlehem that night." Several days later, they toured the area around the Sea of Galilee and tried to find the locations where the Sermon on the Mount and other sacred events in the Bible occurred. Scott read the Bible regularly, both because of his faith and